Chairman Wiggins and I are going to call our task force meeting to order. This is our meeting that we have set aside to adopt the final recs that have been proposed to the legislature. You should have everyone a copy of the packet of information. We do have some members of the task force that are participating remotely via Zoom. Do you have the packet? The members, the task force members? I see Judge Dickinson nodding thumbs up. Perfect. So everyone should have a packet. Cassie is passing those out. And has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes from the October 26th meeting? I see, okay. I see nods. So is there a motion? Chairman Wiggins and I will entertain a motion for adoption of those minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? And we want to thank Melina from CPS for doing such a terrific job in drafting those minutes for us. So thank you. Next, we will go right into the review of the proposed recommendations and the adoption of the final recommendations that will be made to the legislature. And I want to thank all the subcommittee chairs for getting Gwinnetta and Ethan the Word document of your recommendations that have been made in previous meetings. There were 2 supplements that you should have received last Wednesday from Cassie. There was a supplemental report from Judge Kilgore from subcommittee number 2, and then also from Justice Beam for subcommittee 1. And so I'm going to, because there has not been any discussion about the supplements from subcommittee number 1, subcommittee 1 or 2, I'll just take a few moments briefly so that Judge Kilgore, if you want to add anything to the supplement that you're proposing, I will recognize you at this time.
Okay. The only thing to add is, and Jennifer can fill in,
If you don't mind, if you could use the mic. I don't think the mic is on.
my apologies. We did change our supplement a little bit, and I'll just hit the highlights of that. But the first part under number 1 was a little bit.
If you don't mind, could you make, there's a little button on the top. I don't think it's on.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, Gary.
Okay,
Is that better? Good. Sorry about that. Just to hit kind of the high points of some of our changes, and the team can step in anytime they want to add that. The first part was somewhat in response, was after our presentation. In fact, it was the day of our presentation. The Supreme Court handed down a case called SF versus Lamar County that the CPS was a party and the Office of the Public Defender was a party, and we just added, we felt like notice to the child, and a child being a party in a termination of parental rights case was an issue. So we added some of that blue language about making the child a party. That's largely, would you say, Jennifer, largely in response to that case. And the Office of Public Defender felt very strongly, and CPS did not dispute that some language needed to be added, some extra protections about counsel for children, and that the voice of children of a certain age could be heard when their rights the rights to their parents are being terminated, when it may not necessarily be, they may have a position on that. So did you want to share anything else with that, Jennifer?
Did I turn it on or off? How about, yeah, there we go. SF and Lamar, a child who was 18 had the rights to her mother terminated, mother's rights terminated. She was not in court. She was not offered a chance to give an opinion. And actually the GAL testified that at least one of the children wanted to go home, and it was a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old. And neither of them were at court, neither of them had an attorney, and their voice wasn't heard. So we, from the Office of State Public Defender, felt that mom's rights shouldn't be terminated, but from a child welfare in general, that teenagers need to be heard. They have a right to their parents just like parents have a right to them. And we felt, especially with the 18-year-old, that was just a problem. So we proposed language to hopefully keep that from happening in the future.
And the rest of our presentation here is just kind of cleaning up what we already presented. We're moving section 9317.310 to the adoption statute rather than the TPR statute, and then changing the 120 days to 90 days and cleaning up some of the language about when there's an exception to the 90 days for the court to consider termination of parental rights cases. The next one was probably our biggest recommendation, but we just added more language to the recommendation that an agency attorney drives a dependency case from start to finish, and that's on page 3 of our supplement. And it goes through what we do now. Currently, the first legal proceeding, and then the second legal proceeding, and the third legal proceeding, which is adoption, and just kind of goes through how that process and just showing how, I won't read it to you, and everybody's got it, but it just showing the benefits of having an agency attorney start the case from the beginning and see it to conclusion, and why that makes sense. Then the prosecutorial model versus the representation model. Prosecutorial model works great on delinquency cases, but not so much on abuse and neglect cases, and the reasons therefore are stated there.
Judge Kilgore,
Yes,
I had a question. For those other agencies that may have participated in either of the proceedings, have they taken any position on this particular recommendation at all?
Not outside of our group. I know this is CPS and the Public Defender's Office. I don't know that the Attorney General has outside of the CPS representative anyone specific that.
No, I just wanted to know in general if there had been any position stated by any other agency. That was all.
Not to my knowledge. I know that Commissioner Sanders has spoken to several entities. I don't know if
Okay.
Commissioner Sanders, I know she's met with numerous individuals regarding this idea outside of your agency. I don't know, Vicki, if you have any. I think she's stuck in the holiday travel right now, but I think Vicki's
All right, just wanted to know, especially Bryce and I don't want to be on the hot seat with anybody, so
Right.
I just wanted to.
Well, and I do think the only group that would be involved is not a particular agency, it would be the county prosecutors. I mean, there's not another agency that I'm aware of that's in the courtroom at the time, so it would just be the county prosecutors, and you would be taking cases off their docket, so they should not be complaining.
Okay.
You'd be lightening their load.
Just had to ask.
I understood.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Understood. And there at the bottom of page 5, like I said, I won't read our reasoning to you, but there's a list of organizations that recommend the use of agency representation in dependency cases. There's a note there about the funding. The next, this is mid-page 6, there was an issue about appointed counsel, and this is the youth court statute, where it currently says the youth court judge may appoint counsel to represent an indigent parent or guardian in the proceeding. And this was been lots of discussion from our group after our presentation, but we recommend that it be changed to shall, and the reasons therefore are in. And we had a recommendation from the public defender just as recently as Thursday that we've kind of batted around a little bit, but hadn't really had a chance to discuss, because you see our subcommittee note down there, it says that we weren't making a recommendation about whether an indigent parent whether that should be limited to custodial parents or what stages of the proceedings, or whether putative parents should be represented. And I think Andre and Jennifer looked at other statutes and came up with some language that says the court, and this would go at the end of that subsection right there where we put shall. They added a sentence for us to discuss that the court may appoint counsel to represent a non-custodial parent if the court determines that the non-custodial parent is indigent and has demonstrated a significant custodial relationship with the child. All parents shall have the right to be appointed counsel in termination of parental rights hearings, and the court shall appoint counsel if the court makes a finding that the parent is indigent and counsel is requested by the parent. Anything that you want to add on behalf of your office, Jennifer?
We absolutely believe that the may should be changed to shall be appointed, but we are aware that saying that every parent should get a separate attorney is not necessarily the best cost-effective way to do it. So we looked to Arkansas, where it was the custodial parent immediately gets an attorney, and that's at shelter, since that's who the child has been taken from. And then make sure that that custodial parent has an attorney throughout the case, and then non-custodial parents can come forward and ask for an attorney. That way we make sure that we have rights protected, but hopefully in the most cost-effective way.
And the two major reasons for that are right there at the bottom of page 6. The parents have a fundamental liberty interest in that, and we want to make sure that the due process standards are met. And it also facilitates moving children to legal permanency sooner, which is very important to all of us, I think, on this task force. The next was our reasonable efforts and diligent search. That was our second task that we were given, and you can see that right there, the language that we recommend for that, for both of those phrases. Again, I won't read it to you. We did state that we considered whether diligent search should be codified, and this was mainly CPS kind of driving this recommendation, but we agreed that it should not be codified as it's not used in Chapter 21. But if the task force disagrees and wants to codify that language, we have some language that we think works really well there. The third task that we had was compelling and extraordinary reasons. We recommended an amendment that reads this right there. There's 9 points right there. I won't read it to you. The definition of neglect was the fourth task that we had, and that we had a lot of back and forth because as we know, there was a group that already came up with a definition of that, and we've worked with Professor Calder. Mainly, this is, I think, between Commissioner Sanders and Professor Calder, but this is what we have recommended as our language for neglected child. Did you want to add, on CPS, did you want to add anything about the definitions that we came up with? Okay. I won't read it to everybody. It's right there. But those were basically the changes from our presentation, or anything that we're still kind of thinking about.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Ethan at this moment because Ethan has a question or wants clarification. So Ethan, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just had a question back on the recommendation for 4321-201 on page 6. So is the recommendation for every parent or just the custodial indigent parent? Because if it's just for the custodial indigent parent, we may need to just add another sentence, like to put the word shall appoint counsel to represent the custodial indigent parent or guardian, and then add another sentence that says may for the other parent.
Right. That was one of the things we kind of discussed at the end of the week. Right now, we didn't have a position in our official, what we sent in, but the Public Defender's Office had this provision that I think is good, and I don't think CPS had any objection that if the non-custodial parent can show that they have a significant relationship with the child. In other words, if it's an absent CP that doesn't really, may pay child support, but otherwise doesn't really have anything to do with the child, then probably not. But if it's a non-custodial parent that actually visits or has a relationship or a stake has shown an interest in the child, then there would be this, they have to show they're indigent and that they have a relationship with the child. So we can add that to, I haven't polled everybody in our group, and I think everybody's.
As we move forward, I think just changing may to shall would appoint it for all the parents, but if we move forward on a more cost-effective basis, we'd need to adjust that language.
Right.
So Council Gwinnett is telling me that we don't have that information, that it's not included.
Right.
Yeah.
This language, we just passed that around Thursday afternoon, so it was kind of, we wanted to see what everybody's thoughts were on that. The CPS doesn't have an objection, and I have that language. It's just one small little blurb.
Right.
So they need to incorporate in the motion.
We would have to incorporate that in the motion because it's not what we circulated to the task force, and council doesn't have that information. So Gwinnett and Ethan would need it, and then we'd need to incorporate what you just said into the motion because it's not what the task force has before them.
Right, and that's if the task force wants to include that. That's you may want to leave it as is and not take a position on it, but we discussed that late last week.
Okay, I had a couple of questions on the definition on page 8. Could you elaborate and just expound a little bit. It says it would be, this is reasonable efforts appropriate to the child's background. What would all that encompass?
Icky, do you have that? That came from CPS right there in the blue.
Culture.
And then also in the second paragraph, it says that it's going to be, must not consist of required services that are not related to the family's needs. So who's making the determination of what the family's needs are? I guess my concern is that I want to make sure that we are not eliminating services that a child or a family may need.
The child's background, that actually came from the federal guidelines. They usually refer to it as the child's is culturally appropriate, making sure that we understand that. And I'll let CPS speak more on that. Reasonable efforts is a judicial determination, and what we wanted to eliminate was just a litany of required services. So we've seen service plans where the issue is they're homeless. Well, do we really need to drug test them twice a month if that's the only issue? Or if the issue is drug use, do we have to, why are we requiring them to get a GED? It's to keep that to what the family actually needs to return that child home safely, not us trying to make sure that's an ideal parent.
Okay, all right. My only concern was, again, is that the last thing I would want is that if there is a service or a need that the child has, or even the family, I want to make sure it's met. But if this child background, if you're saying that's coming from a federal guideline, so be it. That was my only concern.
Yeah, the child's background is meant to make sure that it's taken into account. For example, are they Native American? Are they Catholic? Or do they have a Hispanic background? And to make sure that the services are tailored towards what that child's culture background is.
Okay, and then on page 10, where we're revising the definition of neglect. So in reading subcommittee number 3's recommendations, they also had a definition of neglect that was a little bit different. So does the committee have a preference on a definition?
That was, one of the tasks of our subcommittee, and this is I know it differs a little from the other, but it is our recommendation. Obviously, it'll be up to the entire task force to choose which one they like, but we've added this around a lot and had Commissioner Sanders and Professor Calder and others try to iron this out, but this is our subcommittee's recommendation for that.
Okay, I think there was a hand that was raised. Is that Mrs. Himes? You're recognized.
Yes, thank you. I wanted clarification on, I believe it's page 1. I'm looking at this from my phone. It's the first blue language under the number 1 for TPR. The very last sentence includes this language: the minor child must consent to the termination of parental rights. I'm concerned that that puts the child in a traumatic position.
We set it at 14 for permission because in order to be adopted, at 14, they also have to give consent to be adopted. So to us, it was a logical conclusion that if they're not going to consent to adoption, we don't want them to just be left out there without any parental relationships.
I still have concerns about that language.
Also,
I'm not sure what we can do. I believe they do need a voice. I don't want them left to emancipate either. But asking a child or requiring them to consent to their parental right termination is, in my opinion, too far. That's asking too much of the child. Can we soften that? Can we change it? Can we give some flexibility at all?
I have some thoughts about that, if I could chime in here. First of all, generally in custody cases, the child is able to express their preference when they reach the age of 18, of 12, I'm sorry. But the court's not bound by the child's preferences. And that's the same thought I had when I read this, is this puts, well, first of all, it puts veto power in the hands of the 12-year-old. And I don't think that our chancellors or any of our county court judges are going to think that that's a good idea. Because they should be able to consider all the facts, not just whether the child wants the parental rights to be terminated or not. So I would suggest that it could say, if the minor child is 12 or older at the time of the hearing, the minor child's preferences must be considered by the court rather than must consent. Because that would give the court that's hearing the case the discretion to consider all the facts.
Professor Calder, just for clarification, that language at the end of that paragraph is age 14, not age 12.
Okay, well, I'm looking at the wrong version then, and that's consistent with the adoption statute 93785. So that was another point. I wanted to be sure at least those were consistent. But
I don't disagree with those concerns. I mean, the Chancery Court shouldn't be held hostage by a 14-year-old who doesn't sign a consent if it's in their best interest. I agree with that.
The language could be softened to say that a child 14 years or older would be consulted.
So let me ask a question. Is the subcommittee's recommendation that they have a preference or consent?
I like the language. He said the preference must be considered.
All right, in the recommendations, it says consent. It doesn't say preference. So is that your recommendation to change it to preference?
well, I can make a motion that the language be amended if that would help.
That would, Professor Calder.
I would move that the language be amended to say that if the child is 14 years or older at the time of the hearing, the child's preferences must be considered by the court.
There's a motion and the second. All those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, thank you, Professor Calder and Mrs. Himes. Thank you.
I had one other comment while I have my mic on. I really appreciate and concur with the appointment of counsel for all parents and for all custodial parents and those who have a relationship with the child. What I was going to point out to the committee is we leave the definition of indigency undefined. And I think that we really don't have a clear guideline for judges to follow at this point in terms of defining, figuring out, is this person indigent to the extent that the appointment is required, even if it says shall be appointed. If the definition of indigency is undefined, it leaves a broad gray area that one person in one county is going to be indigent even if they make above the federal poverty guidelines. And so in some other counties, you're not going to be considered indigent even if you're below the federal poverty guidelines. If the judge states that you're able-bodied and could earn money to hire an attorney. So I know it may be too big of an ask at this point in our process to consider that, but the only place I'm aware of, and I didn't pull this up ahead of time, but I think there's a definition of indigency that's been incorporated into the new the new state criminal procedure rules that guides the courts in terms of appointing indigents in criminal cases. And I'd be glad to take a look at that, and that would be any help. I don't have that information handy right now, but that was just my only other concern about trying to establish some level of consistency across the state in how how the standards are going to be applied.
I would like to kind of piggyback off of that and make a motion to amend our recommendations on 4321-201 subsection 2.
What page is that on?
That is on page 6. And it's what we had previously discussed, just to add the language. Add the sentence after proceeding. So the court may appoint counsel to represent a non-custodial parent if the court determines that the non-custodial parent is indigent and has demonstrated a significant custodial relationship with the child. All parents shall have the right to appointed counsel in termination of parental rights hearings, and the court shall appoint counsel if the court makes a finding that the parent is indigent and counsel is requested by the parent. And I believe that the word custodial is if the court determines that the custodial parent or guardian. I believe that word was left out.
Jennifer, are you able to get that? We're lacking a second. If there's a second, I'll put your motion to a vote.
It's the language we circulated.
I didn't hear what you said.
We need a second.
I'll second that.
Well, should we also add, though, that indigency is, determined by using the guy? I do think we need a uniform definition of indigency, because I think Professor Calder is exactly right, that some youth court judges are going to appoint and some aren't, especially if there's not a uniform definition. And the best place for that is going to be the state procedural rules.
I'm going to recognize Ethan. I saw him pull his mic. Ethan, did you have a comment? You don't? Okay. Professor Calder?
I was just going to say that I did pull up Rule 7.3 of the criminal procedure, and I think I wasn't looking at that, but it cross-references another statute. I'm going to pull that up as well for the definition of indigency.
Why don't we do this for the sake of time? Professor Calder, we do have a motion. It has been seconded. I'm going to put the motion to a vote in just a second, but I would like to have circulated this definition. Everyone hasn't had a chance to see the definition. I want to make sure that we know what we're voting on. Everybody's in agreement with it. And I especially want to make sure that the council have it, because they're going to be the ones that are drafting this report. So all those, but however, later today, I would like all of subcommittees number 2's, all your changes and your proposed definitions, if you could get that to Gwinnetta and Ethan, and then we can circulate it to the full committee. That would be so helpful. So that way, if anybody has any questions about it before the final report goes out, they have opportunity to address it. So all those in favor of the motion, say aye. Are there any opposed? Okay, so that's gone. I'm going to now address subcommittee number 1's supplemental recommendation. Justice Beam is not here. She's not on the phone. Is there anyone from subcommittee? Yes. Terrific. Would you like to address on behalf of your subcommittee your supplemental recommendation, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. What?
It's the page right before the one we were, let's see. It's page right before page 1 of recommendation of subcommittee 2.
And it's just a single sheet.
It's a single sheet.
I'm the one who typed it. Okay, so can you guys?
Just the switch right there. There you go.
Yes, so this really deals with the hard-to-place youth. It really started with the shelter and the ability to provide shelter, emergency shelter for these youth. And I'd love to include David to weigh in if he has any, because we kind of gone back and forth on this. This really looks at the hardest to place youth, generally those that are either highly therapeutic or those that have had multiple placements, have behaviors, have things that make them hard to place in our current placement settings. And so at this point, we have about 10 youth at any given time, and that fluctuates, who are in hotels, who are in acute care placements as holding, so in inappropriate placements, as we all understand, but it's not from lack of trying. And so the state's been really looking at how do we address this. And so a few updates that we wanted to give on this, and then to look at the recommendation, was to update that the agency did issue an RFP for adolescent diversion unit services, which would take the youth that are currently in hotel-type settings, put them into a therapeutic provider setting, and do one-on-one supervision with those youth until they can be stabilized and additional services can be provided. Those, I believe, are time limited to 30 days, and then they can be renewed as needed. But this takes those hardest to take cases and finds a solution. Currently, Methodist Children's Homes and Hope Villages for Children will be providing those. Hope Villages for boys, Methodist for girls, and Brentwood opted not to
They
take their
withdrew.
contract. Yeah.
They withdrew from the contract.
And so it's still a Band-Aid. We still need a lot more services. And so the state has contracted with HMS to evaluate their current placement arrays. They've brought in stakeholders from providers, youth themselves, and a ton of people. I'm only aware of the meetings I was in, but David can speak more to that. Really looking at this from the bottom up and breaking down the box and seeing how to build the box back. Do you want to?
Yeah, those meetings have included, as Sam said, stakeholders, providers throughout the state, also Department of Health, Department of Mental Health, Division of Medicaid, have all been involved in some of those discussions as well as to potential options or how other states have been successful in doing some of these things. So that process is still ongoing. We expect that report to be finalized from HMA and some recommendations to come out of that in the early part of the spring after the first of the year. So they're consolidating that now, but we tried to pull all those players together to really get input from all involved, and including the children and families that of what was missing as far as an array of services available.
What edit is HMA, not HMS, so that's on me. The name of the organization. The other part of this is that CPS has opened up their therapeutic foster care RFQs, meaning that they have opened that up, and it seems to be standingly open, and you guys can address that, but to give opportunity for providers to come to the table on this. And as the president of MACA, which is those providers, we've identified that our current placement settings aren't enough, and that there probably is the need for some outside providers to come in to provide the full service array. And so CPS does currently have that open, and I know are talking to providers that may not currently serve in this state to come and look at that. And this is really looking for what we would call subacute care. So they're not just therapeutic, where they could be at Methodist Children's Homes or some of those, but they don't need to be in a full psychiatric unit. So there needs to be a level of care between that doesn't currently exist in our state. And that's what these meetings and these RFQs are looking at. And so our recommendation right now, honestly, would be to let that process play out and just be ready to be supportive of the findings that are there. This has been something that the provider community and CPS, we've been struggling for a long time, and we just honestly had to come to the conclusion that we need more players with a higher skill set to come into the market.
So your recommendation is just to let the process play out. Let me ask you a question. It says here, legislative recommendation, support needed funding. So is that a part of your recommendation as well, or that's not?
Honestly, I probably should have just left it vague. We do anticipate that there'll be funding needs to have a higher level of care, but right now we don't have anything specific because all of this work is ongoing. There's nothing ready for this legislative session. Go ahead.
Representative Copperhead, this is Dr. Bay, and I'll address that for just a second.
Oh, sure, definitely, Justice Beam.
Okay, I was just going to say that I had spoken with Commissioner Sanders, and although we don't have hospitals available yet or care providers available yet, I think it's important that we make sure that the leadership in Mississippi realizes the need that we have there, because it should not just fall on CPS, and it's all of our concern. Our children are housed in hotels because there are not adequate providers. So we certainly want to, I think we want to leave it in the report. And there may be funding issues. Right now, it's not a matter of funding as much as it's just a matter of a lack of provider that provides that need aspect. And I apologize for being late for our meeting. I haven't previously scheduled meeting before.
Well, we're happy to see you, Justice Beam. Just for clarification from Subcommittee 1, what would be your actual supplemental recommendation that you're making with respect to this concern?
I think it's more of making everyone aware of the fact that Mississippi has a need, that we're addressing that need, but that at the same time, there's a need out there for other providers, as Samantha had said.
Okay. And we are keeping or including the support funding?
We can strike that support funding for now, because until we have a provider, the funding issue is really not the problem. It is, and it may be that ultimately we would need to provide more funding, but it's just going to be a very unique thing. So let's strike that part for now, because even if they provided money, we don't have a provider out there for this unique need.
This is just saying what they do already. This is not.
There is a need.
I would maybe suggest that the recommendation is for us to provide the report that's generated to the chairs once that report from HMA is put together.
I'm not sure when that report will be put together. This is the week of Thanksgiving. The report is actually due next week. And so Ethan and Gwinnetta are under a time crunch as it is to try to compile the report and get it drafted. And so I want to be conscious of their time as well.
What I mean is our recommendation just being that once the report mentioned here in the spring comes out, that it would be provided to the committees, but that there's no action item that we can recommend at this time.
Yeah, we need an agency designated for that.
Who would be the agency designated for that?
MDCPS.
Okay.
It would be
And then what we could also include, Samantha, is the information that you just presented to the task force as well as Justice Beam in terms of an update as to what the status is right now.
Yeah.
And then just add that once this report is made available, CPS will disseminate it.
And we can
That sounds-
include those dates of when the HMA contract, when they're supposed to have it completed.
That sounds like a plan. Okay. Is everyone in favor of that? Are there any objections? Okay. All right. So we've reviewed the supplemental reports. You have the main proposal before us that has previously been presented throughout our meetings. And I just would like to make two comments on Subcommittee Number 1's recommendations. This is going to be, I believe, on page 6. There was a recommendation to expand the county court youth court model to include regional courts. And that is in the recommendation on number 1 and also number 2. And I would just want to say that I know that there is another separate task force that's reviewing this matter. I don't know what their recommendations are going to be. It's my understanding that they're supposed to come forth with a report in 2024, I believe. And so my recommendation would be that we wait to see what that task force recommends, seeing as though that task force is completely dedicated to addressing this particular matter.
Representative Copperhead, that's what they would move despite that too, given that. And also, I think it's just a matter of a need for more court time availability in some areas, but might be a better, more accurate description. But we can just start that all together, so.
Thank you, Justice. Thank you, Justice Bean. And then we did have, and this is just more of a formatting and presentation for the guidelines, pardon me, for the recommendations. We did have Mrs. Simmons on page 27 and also Mrs. Samantha Callahar on page 28. They provided comments. I definitely, if it's no objection from the committee, would like to make sure those are still included in the report, since they took the time to make these accessible to the task force. But I wanted to see since if we could actually include that, keep it in, but could we do it as an addendum, or and we would include it, right? But it would be included, both of their comments, as addendums, just for formatting. And for the definition of neglect, just to confirm, subcommittee number 2 has that definition in their supplement. I did notice some duplication regarding subcommittee number 2 and 3 on Title 4E funding. And so I would just recommend to our council that we somehow consolidate that. It's in subcommittee number 2.
Which committee do you choose? When I consolidate it, who's before it, or just listed as a recommendation?
As a whole.
So merge, okay.
Mhm.
Merge Title 4E funding.
Where it's possible, when there's duplication.
Merged.
So, task force members, those are the recommendations. I think they're very substantive, but I do want to allow at this moment, before I put it to a vote, that we adopt these recommendations. I wanted to see if there were any questions, concerns, anything that we needed to address. Okay, I don't see any. Is there a motion?
Move to adopt the recommendations.
We have a motion by Chairman Wiggins. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right. Well, I want to thank the members of the task force for their very diligent and thorough hard work, for all the comments, for your attendance. We've met now several months, over the period of about 5 or 6 months. It's been a lot of hard work. You've met during the summer. And so I think that we have a good report with recommendations to present to the legislature, and it couldn't have been done without you, your input, and definitely your care for the children of the state of Mississippi. At this time, I'm going to recognize my co-chair, Chairman Wiggins, for closing comments. After Chairman Wiggins makes his closing comments, if there are any members of the task force who wish to have any closing comments, I will recognize you at that time. Chairman Wiggins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't reiterate what she said. I'll say ditto to that. And I want to thank Angela for her work, and Grenetta and Ethan for y'all's work on this, to get these to land the plane, as we say, in time. So thank you, and appreciate everybody participating in this process, because it's extremely important. Now, and I'll conclude with this, the the plane has landed and now we got to take the plane off again in the legislature. So when that plane takes off, we need your support and help, which I know we'll have. But please communicate it out to the people you represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Wiggins. Does any member of the task force, do you have any closing remarks, closing comments? No one. All right. Well, I want to take just a point to say thank you again. Thank Gwinnetta. Thank Ethan. Also, I want to thank Pat, thank Cassie, and thank everyone for all your hard work. This has been a labor of love, and I want to say happy Thanksgiving to you all. And if we don't see you before Christmas, Merry Christmas, and I'm sure we'll definitely see you when the session starts. We will entertain a motion to rise and report progress.
Rise and report.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Gonna jinx it. How are you feeling? I'm good. How are you?